does appear that the war between app developers, app makers here in India and Google is unabating at the moment, with more and more app developers now coming on record accusing Google of dominating its and abusing its dominant position.
Right. So two issues, both related, Shweta. The first issue being that Google had actually delisted almost 200 apps as per reports and had sent letters to 10 of these apps, and these were big prominent names in the Indian startup ecosystem, including Shaadi.com, Naukri.com, Jeevansathi.com, etc. Big B2C brands received those letters from Google saying that its terms and conditions were not fulfilled by the startups, and hence those apps had to be delisted.
Right.
Now, what are these terms and conditions? Google has imposed, and in fact has historically been imposing certain charges, certain fees on apps which use the Google payment ecosystem, which is part of the Google Play ecosystem itself. Now, the in-app purchases, right? Now, earlier there was a 15% lower threshold to 30% max threshold, which after CCI's intervention last year was revised to between 11% and 26%. Broadly, what it means is up to the first $1 million that you earn through in-app purchases from customers, you're charged an 11% fee, and that goes up for every subsequent million all the way up to about 26%. Now, this is something that Indian app developers, Indian startups have opposed, and it's something that even in other geographies like EU, Google has been slapped with antitrust, anti-competition lawsuits, and there have been fines imposed in the past. Now, what has really happened this time around is that these apps got delisted, and then obviously it made headlines because these were big names involved. Now, the Indian government has stepped in, and the Indian government is saying that it is going to prevent Google from abusing its monopolistic pricing strategy and its dominant position in the market. In the past, Google had said that it is not mandatory for app developers to actually host their app on the Google Play Store. And it's a choice which is exercised, but if they do exercise that choice, then they've got to abide by the terms and conditions and the contractual obligations that kick in. But the government is now saying, what the startups then said was that that there is some sort of a discriminatory pricing because big players like Amazon, etc., don't pay a single penny to Google, but it's the smaller apps, the Indian apps, which actually end up being discriminated against and hence fall under this ambit of what they refer to as Google tax. So Google, the government of India has now stepped in and said that it is going to impress upon Google to have a level playing field and to ensure that there is no untoward sort of expectation from Indian startups, Indian app developers to pay this so-called Google tax to Google, and find some sort of a middle ground where it will get startups and Google to sit and sort of renegotiate this. Right. I believe the meeting with startups has happened already, and one more round of meeting with startups is likely to happen after the government is finally able to meet Google.
All right, but come to think of it, up until today, there were a couple of such apps that were delisted. Government had intervened. Now, more than 200 app developers have come out officially stating that while bigger apps seem to have been reinstated on Google Play Store, a number of us, the smaller apps, are still not available out there. Can the government of India intervene in the matter? Is it in its jurisprudence to actually intervene in the matter? Because you referred to that CCI order, which had lowered that fee to about 11 to 26%.
That's right.
Now, CCI has not done further anything to that. Can the government of India actually petition Google to lower that commission fee? Because in a way, Google is right in saying if you do not want to host your apps on our Play Store, you have the right to not do so.
Unilaterally, government of India will not have any authority over Google to change its own terms and conditions and its own sort of clauses which it has built as part of its contractual dealings with app developers. I think at the end of the day, it is going to be a fine balance of certain diplomacy and certain nudging and pushing and making Google realize the size of the Indian app ecosystem, the number of users. In fact, unfortunately, 95% of all smartphone users in India are actually on the Android system, and Android is owned by Google. In fact, Google bought Android in the year 2005, foreseeing the kind of surge in mobile penetration. Unilaterally, government of India will not be able to order Google to change either the pricing strategy. It can nudge, it can push, it can impress upon it, but it cannot literally order Google to either relist those apps or change its pricing mechanism. But I think when courts get involved, when antitrust and anti-competition laws get sort of enacted, and once the lawsuits come into being, that is when some decision can be taken one way or another.
Right, but it doesn't look very good for Google at the moment.
I think what is pressing right now is the 13th March deadline, which Indian startups are hoping will get extended. And that is something which I think the government of India would also be hopeful about, because it has said in its meeting with startups yesterday that there is going to be one immediate solution which the government of India will try and work out with Google. I believe that immediate solution is going to be pushing the 13th March deadline, by when Google expects all these 200 delisted startups to pay up that 11% to 26%, as the case may be, back to Google. And then the government is also committed to find a long-term fix to this problem. And that long-term fix, to my mind, could be perhaps lawsuits and CCS stepping in again.
Long-term solution to the problem, which is what the government is looking at the moment. Remember, Google has faced similar allegations, not just in India, but in EU as well, facing antitrust commissions and competition commissions all across the world, which are now petitioning Google to be more fair when it comes to asking commissions from smaller players.